So last week we discussed how the lost princess had a chance to be freed, but she wasn't, because the Viceroy ended up eating from this tree before on the last day. And he says, "Can I still free you after that?" She says yes, after he had slept for a long time. "But you're going to have to do this again. But this time, you don't have to not eat, you just have to not sleep." Okay, so that's where we're at right now. It says like this. V'alach l'sham, she went there, u'matza ota. He found her. V'ayeta mitzta'eret lefanav ma'od. She was in a lot of pain. Ki'ilu ba'oto bayom, because if she would have came on that day, hayiti motzi oti mikan, would have found me there. V'shvil yom echad ibata, but because of this one day, you lost that chance. However, it's very hard not to eat on that last day. Why? Because the Yetzer Hara is very strong on that day. Therefore, you're going to have to find yourself a new place. Teshev gam ken shena, and spend the whole year there again. But on the last day, you're allowed to eat. Rak shelo tishan, just don't go to sleep. V'lo tishteh yain, and don't drink wine. Kedei shelo tishan, because it'll make you sleep. We don't want you to sleep. Ki ikar hu shena, because the essence of sleep is sleep. V'alach v'asaken. Went and did so. Okay. But Yom Ha'acharon Hayel Holech L'Sham, and on that last day he did it. The whole year he had that one spot that he was doing his bodedus, and he was yearning, and he was trying very deeply. He wanted the lost princess in his life. He wanted to take her out. Followed through the entire thing again. Ra'a Mayan Holech, and he saw a well. He saw a wellspring. Adom v'areich shel yain. He saw it was red, and it smelled like wine. Ma'ain hu amshechet shefa midot rachamim elyonim. The Perush explains that this wellspring, a wellspring is always alluding to the source of compassion, of Hashem's empathy, of Hashem's love for us. With this tremendous life force and shefa, sustenance, spiritual sustenance, which is drawn down from that place. Like it says in Yoel, Mayan mi beit Hashem yetzeh, that the wellspring from the house of Hashem, it goes out. And we know that the house of Hashem is a reference to the Beit HaMikdash. The Beit HaMikdash is the place where there was the revelation of God in the world. In that time that the Beit HaMikdash stood, there was peace in the world. Every Jew had what they needed. They had more than what they needed, even financially, right? It's a time in which there was no interruption in Shefa. It was able to flow forth seamlessly without any type of disconnect or any type of separation or barrier between this. And therefore the wellspring poured forth from that place of the Beit HaMikdash, of that house. And it's through that wellspring drawing force from the house of Hashem. It's through that the Bat Melech, this Shekhinah, a moon of faith or joy, is drawn out from the klipot, the forces of negativity in the world, which we know are either atheism, which is the opposite of faith, or sadness or depression, which is the opposite of joy. We have to draw the Shekhinah from that place. Ube'emet ha'mayim tzarich liot leben. And in truth, this mayan, it needs to be white, not red. Ki romez al shefa chesed v'rachamim, because in Kabbalah they explain that the color white is the color of rachamim, of compassion. In the sense of white is something which, like on the Sefer Torah, right? You have all of the letters on the Torah. But in Kabbalah, they explain that actually the deepest revelation of the Torah is in the white behind the letters. Why? Because the letters, or the color, it represents tzimtzum, it represents constriction or contraction. Whereas the white background, which has no letters, it's almost like godliness before formation, godliness before the creation of the world. It's just pure white light, right? So that actually represents pure compassion, pure love. And it's interesting because those letters, which represent contraction, where these stories of what happens, which is both good and bad, which is both full of unbelievable joy and also tremendous horror and suffering, right? But all of those things took place on this white background, this compassion, this infinite love, right? So we want to draw from that place of white, that infinite love, that place before creation, where father and son or father and daughter were still together one. And on the other hand, we have this quality of redness. And we know it says that Esav was red. It said that in Kabbalah, that Esav is drawing from this quality of din, judgment, that as opposed to rachamim, which is reflected through this white light, judgment is reflected by a red color, by a red light. And that's why it said that Esav was red. And not only did it say he was red, his name was red, right? Like, interestingly, after he was born, it said that he was called Edom as well. Edom comes from the word Adam, which means red, right? So he represents this quality of redness. Now, redness has this two-prong feature, that on the one hand, red can mean judgment or severity or constriction, tzimtzum, but not in a way of holiness, of kedusha, not in a way of godliness, in a way which is a barrier to all of that. Or redness, when it's tempered with rachamim, meaning when it's connected to love, then it could actually be something very, very high. And in that sense, that's reflected by King David, where it said that King David was also red. It said that he was ruddy, right? So what is this alluding to? So the Arizal teaches that the similarity that we see in both King David and Esav in their physical features, this is alluding actually to the fact that King David represents holy red, right? Godly red, as opposed to the red of Esav, where he represents the archetypal klipa that separates us from being able to experience godliness and kindness and love of Hashem in our life. King David represents the quality of holy tzimtzum. He is the ability to nullify himself and his own wisdom for the ability to be able to receive something much greater than himself. That's the malchut of kedusha, right? So even though David himself also represents contraction like Esav, but on the other hand, he is a contraction which actually opens up and allows us to see pure godliness. And in that sense, the Arizal teaches that King David is the tikkun for Esav. And this also is alluding to the secret of how that even though Yaakov represents the tzaddik Yisod Olam, right? He represents this great tzaddik, this great wellspring that flows forth from that house of Hashem. And on the other hand, Esav is red, and it seems like he is the source of all damage in the world. But actually, it's taught that the root of Esav's soul is the same root of King David. And in that sense, King David comes from the soul of Mashiach. So Esav, when channeled properly, meaning the quality of constriction or contraction, when utilized in a correct way, in a way which is healthy, in a way which is spiritually inclined, that ability to contract one's mind, to contract one's consciousness, to be able to perceive something greater than itself, that actually is the quality of Mashiach, or what Rabbi Nachman refers to in the first Torah of the Quran as the rectified moon, the rectified nun. And that is all alluded to by Yeshaya, saying that one day the moon will shine as bright as the light of the sun, but the light of the sun will be 7 times, right? So if you have already the light of the sun is the quality of 7, and then you times that by 7, right? Because there's 7 times. So now you have 49. And all of a sudden, if the moon is as great as the sun, so then the moon has went from a state of like no revelation of God to 49 times that. But we know that according to Kabbalah, actually in a paradoxical way, we're going to see that this quality of tzimtzum, this quality of contraction, the quality of redness, that at its source it's even higher than the white. The root of all concealment is actually higher than revelation. And in that sense, the moon will actually be one step above the sun. Or the feminine dimension of spirituality will be shown at the end to be even higher than the male dimension. And in that sense, it will have reached the 50th. And we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to achieve all 49 gates of Bina, of understanding in his life, not the 50th, only when he passed away. And Rabbi Nachman alludes to all of this as being hinted to in the fact that it says in the Torah that when he was buried, Hashem buried him, and we still don't know where he's buried to this day. So Rabbi Nachman has a tremendous chiddush on this, and he's saying not just that we don't know where he's buried, but that he's actually, it's not saying that we don't know, it's saying that he's buried in the place of not knowing. That as opposed to Moshe's whole quality, that he was able to know Hashem so deeply, he's like the white light, that light of the sun, he was able to see Hashem's love and compassion. So he saw all 49 gates of that. But when Hashem said he can't get into the land of Israel, but he let him see before he passed away, that represents the 50th gate. And that 50th gate is actually emunah, is faith. The ability to believe above knowing, the ability to be super conscious, right? And that's the place of not knowing. That's the place that Hashem told Moshe that he was buried in, that nobody knows this place because this place is unknowable. Like Rabbi Nachman used to say about his own teachings, my teachings are so hidden that even when I reveal them, they're still hidden. And also, towards the end of his life, that he said to his students, I don't know why you still come to me, I don't know anything. Because we know that on Purim, there is a point on the day of Purim that according to the Arizal is the greatest revelation of godliness the entire year. And that is the time of I don't know anything. That we have this mitzvah that we're supposed to get drunk enough that we don't know the difference between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai. We don't know the difference between the good things that have happened to us in our life and the suffering and the challenges that we've been through in our life. It's all one for us. Why? Because we reach the place of not knowing. Now, usually drunkenness is a place of contraction which conceals us from Hashem, and we're going to see that in a moment. But there's a level of drunkenness that actually comes from emunah, from faith. That you're so drunk with faith that you believe so much in Hashem that your belief actually precedes and transcends your level of knowing. That to you, the good and the bad, there is no differentiation between them because you believe that they're all coming from the same infinite source of love and good. And that itself is the place of not knowing. Now, it's not something that you can just say, snap your fingers, like, I want to believe like that, right? The chiddush is that you need to get to many levels of knowing before you can actually achieve this level of not knowing. And this is alluded to by this cute story that I've told you guys before, where Rav Natan's student said to him, I think I know what Rabbi Nachman was talking about. So he said, what do you mean? He said that the highest level of knowing is not knowing. He said, I don't know. He said, I also don't know. I think I know what he's talking about. I don't know anything. So the Rav Natan said, no, you actually don't know anything. Rabbi Nachman's not knowing anything was not, you're not knowing anything. You don't know anything because you don't know anything. He doesn't know anything because he knew everything. And he got to the level of, I don't know anything. Like Shlomo Melech, he said he reached the apex of wisdom. And then at the end of it, he said, but wisdom is far from me. Why is it far from him? Because he got to the level of knowing, not knowing, okay? This is the highest level. That when you get to the peak of understanding, you realize that in the face of infinity, in the face of Hashem, it's actually still nothing. And this is an unbelievable thing, because if you know how great of a revelation that Moshe Rabbeinu got, that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai got, that the Arizal got, that the Baal Shem Tov got, that Rabbi Nachman got, how much they knew Hashem, how deeply they knew Hashem. And still they haven't tasted a drop in the water in the ocean. It's something that's so exciting, that's so unbelievable, that's so incredible, that it's hard to fathom. That even when you get to the peak, you should know you haven't started yet, and you can just keep going, right? Like someone once came to Rabbi Nachman and they gave him this Kabbalistic svara that somebody came out with a book about how there actually is a peak of knowing Hashem according to Kabbalah, and one can achieve that, and when they achieve that, there is no more knowing of Hashem. And Rabbi Nachman said that this is foolish, because Hashem doesn't end, and His greatness knows no bounds, and therefore even if you achieve the highest level of knowing, you can never say that you can't know more, because then you're saying that Hashem is limited in some way. And even the concept of, they speak about the rock. Can a rock be? I forget what the concept is. It's like some type of paradox. Can this thing do this thing, and this thing like itself? It's impossible for it to do that thing, because then it itself wouldn't exist. And so in philosophy, in the Torah, like people will say that Hashem doesn't do that. And there's actually philosophers, Jewish philosophers, even the Rambam, who says that he won't create something that can do something different than that. Like I'll get, just to make this less abstract, like, can Hashem be imperfect? Right? You can't say that Hashem could be imperfect, chas v'chalila, right? But if you say that He can't do something, you're limiting Him. So, but we can't limit Him. We're not allowed to limit Him. So then how can you say He can't become perfect? So then we have to say He is perfect, but He could also become perfect. How could He be perfect but also become perfect? That denies that defies understanding. So according to the Rambam, there's no such thing. He can't become perfect. He's already perfect. But Rabbi Nachman says, I believe he could do both. He could do both. You can't say that he can't do something. He could be perfect. He could become perfect. He could change. He could not change. You can't say that he can't do something, because if you say that he can't do something, you're limiting him. How could it be that he could be perfect and he could also become perfect? Right. So the fact that we don't understand doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Hashem knows no limits. He knows no bounds. There's nothing that we can do or say which can limit Him in any way. Okay? So now, what gets in the way of us being able to actually experience this? What we're going to see is it has to do with this red river. The river that he drinks from, which he gets confused by, because on the one hand it looks like water, and the princess said he could eat, he could drink, just not to drink wine. Right? Because what river is made out of wine? And yet this water happens to be red. And now we understand that this redness represents judgment or din. So what's the judgment of water? What is that din? Merov hagavura to klipot bayom ha'achron, that the majority of judgment and dinim and contraction, tzimtzumim, the empowerment of the Yetzer Hara, is primarily on that last day. Nitkalkel amayim shamayim, and it blemishes and it tarnishes this wellspring of water, and it flips it to wine, meaning redness, gevura, judgment. And all of this is made through the corruption or the distortion of the power of imagination. Because the klipot are not able to actually have any type of negative effect on the wellspring itself, not at its root. Therefore, really, the I can't say this word; it's too early for me. The negativity, the minimalization of the well is not happening in its source. It's actually happening within our own imagination. And that power of imagination, which is tarnished, then rises up to our mind, which is reflective. Our mind is reflective of the wellspring. So even though these, the place that we're struggling with now is in thought, But really, there is nothing wrong with the Jewish mind. The Jewish mind is pure. So then where do negative thoughts come from? Where do thoughts of lack of belief come from? They come actually from the distorted power of imagination, which is in the heart. It just rises up to the mind because the heart is the place of consciousness. The mind is the place of unconsciousness, right? So however the heart is, that's how the mind reflects itself. It's not a hint to the quality of one's mind when one has negative thoughts. It's actually a reflection of a broken heart. And that broken heart then elevates and is shown and reflected through one's thoughts and one's mind. So too here, there is nothing wrong with the wellspring that comes from the house of Hashem. The issue is that it appears red because of the blood in one's heart, because the distorted powers of imagination that one has. And it nourishes from there, and it blemishes there, until that it flips this wellspring of water, and it becomes a wellspring of yayin. In Rav Aryeh Kaplan's commentary on this, he explains that in the first case, the Viceroy fell into taiva, right? He fell into physicality. He fell into the tightness of this world and embellishing in it and overutilizing it and using it for purposes in which it has no greater reasoning, right? Whether it's through sexuality or whether it's through physicality, whatever it may be. He fell in that way and fell asleep for a little bit of time. Now in this case, he drinks from this river which is red and falls asleep. Now we know that the water, like we're seeing here, is the concept of wisdom. So what is a wisdom which is red? What is a wisdom which actually makes one drunk, but not in a way of achieving the highest level of knowing, which is not knowing at all, but instead it achieves the lowest level of knowing, or the most external level of knowing, the most constricted level of knowing, the most physical level of knowing. That itself is what Rabbi Nachman calls chokhmot chitzoniot, secular wisdom. Okay, this is what we alluded to in our last class. This is something that Rabbi Nachman was very, very, very makpid on. He was very strong on this point, that a person needs to stay away completely from secular wisdom. He spoke about it many times, just as much as he spoke about hibodedut. He spoke about the fact that a Jew needs to stay away completely from secular wisdom. Why does Rabbi Nachman say a person needs to stay away completely from secular wisdom? Because knowing is very deep. That as opposed to, let's say, I fall in physical taiva, but for me to fall in physical taiva, it's not affecting my mind, it's affecting my body, right? But my body is like the lowest part of myself. Even, let's say, chas v'chalila, different parts of my body stop working. But if my mind is fully intact, so I'm fully myself. And we've seen many times that people in their life have had physical health issues, but they're sharp in their mind. And it didn't derail them at all. In fact, maybe in some ways it increased the power of their mind, the fact that they had this suffering of the body. But we have in this case, when a person's mind goes, they really go, right? A person's thoughts is essential to them. They are their thoughts, so to speak, right? So in this case, this is why the thoughts take place in the mind. That's why a person's brain is concealed and it's hidden and it's at the top. Because there's a pasuk, it says, from my flesh I'll see God, right? And we learn from this, based on Kabbalah, that man was made as a reflection of the 10 sfirot. So in that sense, just like the 7 lower sfirot are revealed godliness, but the 3 higher sfirot are concealed godliness, but they're higher. And those 3 sfirot, which are concealed godliness, which are higher, actually give birth to those 7 revealed sfirot, which are revealed godliness. So too, the mind is completely hidden. And yet, the mind actually gives birth to everything which is lower. We could see this just through, like the Tanya says, that when a man is intimate with a woman, he gives forth seed. That seed comes from his mind. The life force of his mind is drawn into his seed, which is given over to a woman. she is conceives with a child, and the child is given birth to. So where did that child come from? It came from the zera of the father's mind, right? So in that sense, the mind, really the thought, gave birth to that human being, gave birth to life. So too, our thoughts give birth to our life. Like the Lubavitcher Rebbe used to say, think good and it'll be good. Why? Because thoughts give birth to reality. So now we're seeing here, same too here. This, Rabbi Nachman said, we need to be most conscientious of. That even if we fall into taiva, okay, so you get up and you start over again, right? Rabbi Nachman says, no, doesn't say anywhere, don't ever do this, don't ever do this, don't ever do this. He says you're going to struggle with it, you're going to rise in it, you're going to fall in it, you fall asleep, you're going to get back up. But Rabbi Nachman says by secular wisdom, don't touch it, don't look at it, don't hear it, don't smell it, don't taste it, no nothing. Why? Because it affects your mind. And even though it's hidden, and even though it's concealed, everything in your mind gives birth to all things in your life. Rabbi Nachman says that actually one's power of thought is so powerful that one is able to actually use his thoughts alone to create reality. And he says this is actually the reason why sometimes he says you'll experience this, that you'll just think about somebody randomly and then you see them physically. It's happened to me too. You're just like, wow, this person just pops in my head, and then they walk by. So now we think like, oh, it must be a coincidence. But Rabbi Nachman actually says you created that person coming by you through your thought. Now again, we spoke about in the past that you're not your thoughts, okay? So not to think that because I have negative thoughts, that therefore I'm inherently, something's wrong. Because we're learning again that my thoughts are being reflected through my heart, okay? So therefore I don't experience my thoughts as they are. I experience them through that heart. And this again is alluding to something very deep. That is, that this second fall actually is derived from the first one. So to speak, that this river of red didn't exist until he ate from that tree with those red apples. And this Rabbi Nachman says, which is a big chiddush, secular wisdom actually comes from people who are sunken in taiva. That philosophy or different forms of thought or theory which come from atheism, even if they're subtle, are actually coming from a person's being sunken in physicality. And this is bared out by history, because all of the greatest philosophers were also actually known to be the greatest sexual deviants. They were also known to be the most immersed in the physical world. So Rabbi Nachman says that these two things are actually deeply interrelated. It is the fall into physicality alone which strengthens one's mind and their capacity to understand that physicality. So here, this is a very deep thing. Think about this. What's the problem with secular wisdom? It's still wisdom. So the concept of chitzoni, it means external or peripheral, right? If you look at somebody and you look at them only as they look on the outside, you'll miss who they really are. Now, you can't say that that person's not what they look like. They are, right? They are that person that you see. But could you say that that person is inherently what you see? Definitely not. There's so many levels to knowing a person. There's so many layers within a person. Even layers of unconscious knowing that person, that themselves don't even know about themselves. That it takes a lifetime for them to unravel and to reveal these deeper parts of themselves before they can even reveal it to others. A person is infinitely deep. We're compared to a world, right? So, but at the same time, if you only know the outside of that person, and let's say you think that they are only the outside of themselves, so then what are you going to do? You're going to study the outside. You're going to study their features. You're going to study how they look. You're going to study how they move. You're going to study all these things. And you're going to be able to derive very deep insights about the outside of that person. But if you believe that this person is only the outside of them, right, then you're going to involve all of your efforts in only getting to know them externally or superficially. Now, while you might think that that's a tremendous merit and then you're having an incredible increase in wisdom about this person, you're actually moving further away from that person. Why? Because you're moving away from who they are inherently. You're building up more and more levels of superficiality, and your attachment to those levels in terms of who that person is and what they are. Why? Because you're investing so much effort in knowing them externally. So too, secular wisdom, or chokhmot chitzoniot, which does not just mean knowing things about the world. It means knowing things which are actually divorced from spirituality, which have no root in the Torah, okay? And this could reflect itself in many different arenas of thought. So when I become an expert in that thing, when I research that thing, when I engage in trying to know that thing as deeply as possible, like they do in science, right? What is science? Science is the knowing of physical reality through way of sight, through way of hearing, through way of taste, touch, and smell, according to our 5 physical senses. If you look up the definition of science, you'll see it's not trying to ascertain or to understand any level of reality deeper than the most superficial level of existence. Why? Because they hold that we can't know anything that we can't sense physically. So because of that, they only study what can be sensed by the physical senses. And so what are we going to come out with? Physical information, physical wisdom. But the issue is that the physical world and what we perceive of it is only the skin or the peel of reality. There are infinite levels of depth of reality, just like there are infinite levels of depth of a human being. So if you only study the outside of that person and you invest all thought in that place and you believe that that's all that there is, what ends up happening is you create a very superficial understanding of the world and of life. And the damage that comes from that is that you miss the soul of reality. You miss the soul of that person and the soul of the world. And the soul itself is what gives birth to that world. It's what gives birth to that person. It's where life force comes from, where it's derived from, right? And this is why Rabbi Nachman says, and Rav Natan speaks about this a lot in Likutei Halachot, that the life force of a Jew is the chokhmah in everything. It is the godliness which is deeply, deeply hidden within the physical metziut, the physical reality of something. So that if a person is only cogitating, is only meditating on what's happening physically, he says that a non-Jew can actually derive life force from this. That when a non-Jew learns science, when a non-Jew learns deeper and deeper levels of understanding of the physical world, he actually derives tremendous life force from this. However, when a Jew tries to meditate on secular or external, superficial wisdoms or understandings of life, it actually takes his life force away. It actually makes him more fatigued, more tired, less lively, less energized, less excited about life. Right? All of this is alluded to in a story that I've told you in the past. That this boy, he was in yeshiva and he was on fire. He mamish was learning and praying and connecting, and he literally was so immersed in the soul of life, learning about it, connecting to it, meditating on it, drawing life force from it. And then one day he just stopped coming to yeshiva, and all the guys around him were wondering, what happened to you? You were like literally the people we were all looking up to you. Like we couldn't believe you were there first. You left last. You didn't even get up to eat when we got up to eat. You were like so into it, so immersed in it. You were so on fire. And then you just stopped showing up. And they got nervous about him, so they came to visit him at his home. And he was dressed up like in pajamas, and he looked really disheveled and not well. And they asked him, what happened to you? He goes, to be honest, I really don't know. I was like really on fire, and I felt so close to Hashem, and I felt so deeply connected. And then all of a sudden, I just lost all my motivation and all my life force and all of my energy and like all of my desire to want to be connected to this. I just kind of like a balloon, like the air just went out. And he said, I don't know why. So they said to him, why don't you come back in? He said, I don't want to. They said, listen, they were Chabadniks. So he said, why don't you write a letter to the Rebbe? Why don't you write a letter to Lubavitcher Rebbe and ask him what he thinks you should do? What happened to you? So he did. He wrote him a letter, and he told him everything that I just told you that he told his friends. The response of the Rebbe was very terse, very short, and this was his response. Stop reading the newspaper at night before you go to sleep, and you will be motivated again to go to yeshiva, and you'll go on fire again, and you'll go even higher. This boy did not say that he was reading the newspaper at night before he went to sleep. He did not tell his friends he did that. He himself did not connect any type of connection between his reading the newspaper at night before he went to sleep and the fact that the next day he didn't want to go learn. Okay? But the Lubavitcher Rebbe had Ruach HaKodesh, like all the great tzaddikim did. And his response to him was that, based on what we're learning now, if you fall into taiva, right, if you fall into a lacking in physicality, so you're going to maybe fall from that place, but then you'll be able to mechazik yourself to start over again. But in this case, he literally didn't have the koach. He didn't want to come closer. He didn't want to start over again. He didn't want to engage in spiritual exploration. He just didn't have the energy or the desire to do it. Why? Because it was sapped from his reading the newspaper the night before. Because the newspaper is filled with secular wisdom, okay? Now, for a non-Jew to read the paper will give him life force. However, for a Jew, whether they know it or not, it actually takes away their life force, because the life force of a Jew is emunah. And emunah, which is pure, is drawn from the Torah. So therefore, when the news is coming from these places, it caused this boy to stop wanting to learn and to pray. It just took away all of his koach. And we might be able to have some type of taste of this. Like, let's say, for instance, you yourself, you have some type of learning seder, and you're learning in the middle of your learning, and all of a sudden you get a text from a friend, send you an article about something that has happened recently. And so what happens, you open it, and all of a sudden you read this thing, and then you'll notice right after that, like, you don't want to go back into your book. What do? You decide that you want to go eat now. You go eat. And then all of a sudden you realize, like, hours have gone by, and like a few hours ago you were like on fire, and now you're not, and you don't know why. So how did it start? You think it's because I overate. But why did you overeat? So you see, it's because you read that newspaper article. Yeah? What's the reason? Again, Rabbi Nachman is not extreme, and he said that there is no need for being extreme at all in all wakes of life, in anything. He says to be a Jew and to be spiritual and to be connected to Hashem requires no form of extremism whatsoever. So anyone who hears this class right now and this topic that we are meditating on will come away thinking only one thing. Rabbi Nachman is very extreme in his perspective on secular wisdom. It seems very extreme. So we can see from the fact that this person who held that no extremism is necessary at all, he must be of this wondrous belief that not looking at secular wisdom for a Jew is not something extreme whatsoever. It's pashut. Sorry about that. It's simple, okay? It's something which is obvious and simple. It's not something extreme. It's like, for him, just like a person wouldn't eat non-kosher food, he wouldn't say, I'll eat a little bit. Right? Because why be so extreme about it, right? Like, okay, Hashem doesn't want me to eat non-kosher food, but nobody says to themselves, but, he doesn't want me to, but he doesn't want me to, He says, I'm not going to eat kosher food no matter what. Nobody who's a religious Jew who keeps the mitzvot, who keeps kosher, thinks that this is extreme, that I'm not eating non-kosher food. They think this is what the Torah wants me to do, this is what Hashem wants from me, and they think that this is normal. So too, Rabbi Nachman says that secular wisdom is like non-kosher food of the mind. And so not to think to yourself, it's not extreme what I'm saying. It's just like you wouldn't eat treif, which is physical food, you shouldn't eat treif, which is spiritual knowledge. Okay? Because in a very deep way, the effect of food, which is thoughts or wisdom, which is not kosher, which is not rooted in the Torah, is actually more damaging and makes you sleep for longer than, so to speak, non-kosher physical food, meaning falling into taiva of the physical world within yourself. And we see what ends up happening to him when he drinks from this river of wine. So why is it a river? Because it's wisdom. Water is always wisdom. Why is it red? Because it's chitzoni, it's external, it's secular. So as opposed to in this first case, in which he sleeps for a period of time, now he sleeps for 70 years, much longer. So now another explanation that Rabbi Kaplan gives is the fact that we know that there are 70 nations in the world. right? Or spiritually, there are 70 nations, 70 root nations. And we also know that there are 70 faces of the Torah. What is the connection between these 70 wisdoms of the Torah and the 70 nations of the world? So where did those nations come from? So we know that actually when the world began, there was one people with one language. And then Hashem made it that there was then differentiation. And humanity was then split up into 70 different quarters. Those 70 different quarters, where did that take place? That took place in Bavel, right? So those are the 70 nations. And we know as well that what happened in Bavel, that's where we were after the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. How long were we there between the first and second Beit HaMikdash? 70 years. Why? Because the Arizal explains that those 70 years of Bavel is a tikkun for those 70 nations that were created in the beginning. Okay? Now, so what do we mean? What are we saying? We're saying that really, when I'm engaged with the 70 nations of the world, which means with secular wisdom, it then closes me off from the 70 faces of the Torah, which is the life force of a Jew. That is pure godliness, these 70 faces. This is all alluded to by Yaakov and his 70 children, right? Or him and his 69 children, all 70 together, going down to Mitzrayim. Why? Because Mitzrayim is the place of constriction, and him and all of his children, they represent the 70 faces of the Torah. So, but what we're learning is very deep, because even though we're saying that learning secular wisdom, according to Rabbi Nachman, is much more damaging than even falling into taiva. However, the desire to want to learn secular wisdom, Rabbi Nachman says, and where it actually comes out from, it comes actually from our falling into taiva. Like we have learned that first he eats from this tree and this apple, and then only after drinks this wine. And so too, Rav Aryeh Kaplan says, you can see that this is alluded to in the first two great men that ever lived that are alluded to in the Torah. That is that Adam Rishon ate physically from that tree, and we see that he fell asleep, mamish. And then what ended up happening? There was not any revelation of God in the world until Noach came. So that, so to speak, all of those generations were like generations of sleep. All of a sudden Noach came, and Noach was a big tzaddik. Noach was a big tzaddik. And what happened? He was able to run away from that world of pure physicality. He was able to build himself a teva, a safe space of spirituality, and to infuse himself with it. And all of his students, meaning all the animals, were in there with him in that teva, safe, protected. But what ended up happening to Noach? Right after it was over, the flood was over, meaning the flood of taiva. He then he then drank wine, it said. And he got drunk. And he became naked. And he ended up getting humiliated. And it ended up being that Canaan was cursed because of that. And we know that Canaan was the name of the land of Israel before we conquered it. It's called Eretz Canaan. Canaan literally means poor or impoverished. And the Gemara says that there is no poverty besides a poverty in Da'at, of God consciousness. So Canaan represents poverty of God consciousness. Where's the greatest poverty of God consciousness? From secular wisdom. So now what happens? Noach gets drunk, meaning he imbibes in secular wisdom even after he overcomes this place that Adam fell in. And then he falls asleep for even longer. And the negative consequences that came from that were even, so to speak, more felt in the world, because now there's Canaan, there's a poverty of Da'at, as opposed to the physical goof, the physical body falling in its stature of godliness. Now the mind, or the thought, consciousness has now fallen, and now it's asleep for 70 years. Okay? So that's all alluded to by this river of red. And this is the concept of that river, that red river smelling, having this delicious smell. Because this is all the power of imagination. Because initially, the klipot, they damage one's power of imagination, meaning when they ate the first time from the tree. And now, when he sees secular wisdom, it starts to smell really good. He's more interested in getting it. Just like we said, that where did philosophers get their theories from? It actually started from the fact that they were overly immersed in the physical world. And now all of a sudden the smell of secular wisdom started to smell really good. It started to develop as a chush, a real sense. And that's why this mayan, which is red, which is coming from the power of imagination, becomes such a sweet smell. Just in the same way that maybe when you might see a newspaper article, you might become enthralled by it, and you might say to yourself, I'm getting life force from this. Because that's the smell. That's the smell which is not real. It's a dimyon. Because you're going to see that what happens after that is you actually lose your yearning to want to learn. You lose your yearning to want to pray. You lose your yearning to want to hope in Hashem versus hope in different systems in the physical world or in different authorities. All that is related. Lamar Reich Shoyayin. This was the appearance of the beautiful appearance of this river that was a red river, and the fact that it smelled the smell of wine, even though it was a river. And then, so to speak, even though the source of one's thoughts is not damaged and it can never be damaged, it's always pure, and that is our hope. That is our hope and length of our days. The fact that we know that there's a place inside our mind, inside our hearts, that can never be touched. And that's where Rabbi Nachman is trying to bring us back to. Because it already exists within us. We don't need to create it. It's already there. However, so to speak now, our thoughts have become distorted. They become damaged. They become blemished. They themselves, even though it's coming from the power of imagination, which is in the heart, however, we're experiencing, so to speak, like it's in our mind because it's our thoughts. Shegaram lo shichrut v'sheina. And then, so to speak, a person is in a state of drunkenness and sleep. So this is an amazing thing. We usually think of being drunk as, a person taking whiskey, taking a beer, drinking too much, whatever it is, and then he loses his mind. He's not working in that time when he's drunk. He's not growing. He's not learning, right? He's drunk. He lost his mind. He's not acting like himself. He's doing things he wouldn't normally be doing. He's engaging in dangerous behaviors. Why? Because he is drunk. Okay. So now Rabbi Nachman says, now what's the difference between that and a Jew who learns secular wisdom? What does the Jew who learns secular wisdom do? He stops pursuing God. He stops wanting to learn about who he is. He stops trying to grow spiritually. He invests all of his energy and time and efforts in physical or external things. So Rabbi Nachman says, that's not drunk. What's being drunk? What is that? That's the same thing. He's drunk. But if you ask him, he says, I'm totally fine. Everything's okay. That's the degree to which he's sleeping. And he asked the servant, he said to the servant, you see this river? It's a wellspring. It's water. But look at its appearance. It's red and it smells like wine. Like we know, it's very deep. I don't know if everyone here knows this, but when you drink wine for Kiddush on Shabbat, you're actually supposed to drop 3 drops of water into the wine. Now, it used to be that what was the reason, Pashut Pshat, that we used to put water in wine? Because wine used to be very, very, very strong. It wasn't like the wine of today that it's very diluted. The wine back then, you only need to drink a little bit of it, and you got very drunk. That's the reason why the Torah holds that halachically, when you have drinking a revi'it, it's enough to make a bracha achrona. But why? A revi'it is like nothing. So the answer is, back then it was something. It would get you drunk, okay? So what do they need to do? They needed to put water in it in order to actually make the wine drinkable, right? And to dilute it so it didn't get you so drunk so quickly. However, Kabbalistically, we're learning that red wine represents judgment, it represents din. That on the one hand, wine is a liquid, so it represents wisdom, but on the other hand, it's red, that represents judgment. Okay, that represents constriction. So now what do? We know that wine is very, very holy though, and the Kiddush on the first night of Shabbat is like the highest peak of the week, right? The Ramban says it's like Matan Torah. And we know that Rabbi Nachman, they said that on Shabbat night when he did Kiddush, he had such awe. It looked like the awe and trepidation that the Jews had at Har Sinai. Like he was literally like in a state of such devekus with Hashem. It's like something awesome was taking place. So what was so awesome that's taking place? That this source of wisdom becomes sweetened by these waters. What does the water represent? The water represents rachamim, compassion. Because we know that actually the greatest revelation of godliness doesn't come when things are just pure water. It's actually when you take wine and you add water to it. It's when you take judgment and you sweeten it. That's a much greater revelation than if there is no judgment to begin with. And all of this again is alluded to by the fact that Mashiach comes from David, who so to speak is a bechina of Esav. That yes, Yaakov Avinu is pure Torah. He is pure spiritual wisdom, and in that sense, he's the tzaddik. But the Mashiach actually comes from David. It comes from his ruddiness, his redness, his affinity towards constriction and judgment. But through his sweetening it, he actually reaches a higher level of revelation. That versus these 49 gates of Kedusha, which we have spoken about, which are alluded to, we have this 50th gate, which only the Mashiach has. And that is when judgment itself is sweetened, when the concealment itself is able to be flipped and reversed, to be shown that Hashem is there. That in the hastar shebetoch hastar, the concealment within the concealment, that godliness is able to be revealed even in that place. And that is all alluded to by the water that you drop on the wine, that you drink on the night of Shabbat and during the day as well. Bechinat achilat Shabbat. We machaven to the Perush that he eats on Shabbat and it's complete godliness, because we know that the food on Shabbat is pure godliness. That during the week, Rabbi Nachman says you should really make sure you're eating mindfully and within measure. But on Shabbat, all of the food is pure godliness, pure kedusha. Umadua yesh kan nisyon, and it's known there is here a challenge. There's a difficulty. Mechamat shemash kenafal. That when the Yetzer Hara wants to entice a person who's really trying, who's a kosher individual, he's trying to distance himself from physicality, which is extreme, which is without moderation. He actually causes him to err little by little. That he is first confused and bewildered in his mind. Right? And now that he is confused and bewildered in his mind, he's now engages in overuse of physicality. Right? Like just like when a person gets drunk, you'll notice that you want physical things much more. Right? You want to eat like crazy. You want to drink like crazy. You want to engage in sexual intimacy in ways which you wouldn't normally do. Why are all those things happening in your state of drunkenness? Because these two elements, they work with each other, right? First, you fall asleep up here, and then you're going to fall asleep down here, right? And the same thing the other way. When you fall asleep down here, you're going to fall asleep up here, because the heart and the mind, they work in unison. But a person who's really working on not engaging in those taivot, he might think to himself, so I'm not going to touch this at all. I'm just going to have a glass of wine, right? And I don't go more than I need to. but the glass of wine gets me drunk. And now that I'm drunk, I do engage in those taivas. So it's like a very subterfuge way of getting a Jew to be able to engage in the taivot more than he wants to, through a way which is not a direct means. And we're learning that right now is secular wisdom. By engaging in the study and the meditation, the absorption of secular wisdom, through that itself, I will actually become drunk and want to engage more in taivot. העניין הדבר מתהווה עליו, תכף שנכנס בדברים בעניין התאווה, מתגבר עליו יצהר עד שכישלו בה. כמו שמפורש בתורה בעניין ניסיון עץ הדעת, like was the inyan of the test with the עץ הדעת. איך שדבר הנחש עם חווה, how was it that the nachash tricked Chava? כי אמר אלוקים. Why? Because he came to him with secular wisdom. Right? Went to Chava and said that Hashem wanted something different. It's not exactly what Hashem said. There's more going on, right? And that intellectual curiosity that there's something more going on than what the Torah says, that there's like some level of reality that like I'm cut away from, that arouses such curiosity and causes me to draw after it, that even though Hashem told me not to eat from this tree, meaning not to engage in physicality which is without limit and without any type of spiritual meaning. However, once the Nachash comes and gives me some form of secular wisdom, now all of a sudden I'm doing both. Both my mind or my thoughts go in the gutter, and so too I then engage in physical desire anyway, because it comes from and it's rooted in that secular wisdom. And then after that he spoke to the Nachash, she saw that that tree was good for eating. But before she spoke to the Nachash, she did not see that the tree was good for eating. It was only after. So now we're learning a very, very deep thing. Why did that change for her? Why all of a sudden did this yearning to just embellish in physicality increase so much for her out of nowhere? Why did that tree all of a sudden look good for eating and not when Hashem spoke to her? Because Hashem was speaking to her, meaning the tzaddik is speaking to her, or the Torah is speaking to her. So now that tree doesn't look so good, right? It seems like it's a barrier, it's an impediment. But now all of a sudden that I get some type of secular wisdom and it causes me to be in a stupor of consciousness. My consciousness goes into exile. Now all of a sudden my body becomes heightened and my desire for physicality becomes heightened. And now all of a sudden it looks good for eating. And this taiva now looks good for the eyes. And who's truly a person, he has consciousness. He desires to stand in this test. He wants to muster all of his strength and energy to be able to overcome this challenge. And to remove his own limited understanding completely. And not to enter into this taiva, into this opportunity, not to enter into this experience because of how he feels right now. But because that this person is weakened spiritually, because of the secular wisdom, so now he doesn't have the desire to even want to work on this thing anymore. He's happy, he's fine engaging in all of these things. He doesn't feel like it's an issue or it's going to be an impediment for him at all. He has no even thought to even work on this thing or to try and overcome this challenge. He's not confused by his desires at all. So what should one do? So he says here that one should engage in sichot averim with a friend, or you should engage in the learning of Torah to be able to resettle his mind. And this is actually, it's brought down in many different places, that what's a way to help me eat mindfully? To actually learn Torah while I eat. And that's actually the reason, one of the deeper reasons why we're supposed to always say over Divrei Torah at the meal. Because the Divrei Torah itself, that light of godliness, is actually what gives us the koach to eat within measure, right? So we're seeing here that there's this very deep connection between these two things. And what happens? He falls asleep for 70 years. And we know the gematria of 70 is also the gematria of sod, which means the secret. Hainu sheyesh so b'bria, meaning that there's a secret in creation. Ve'ein la'kashot elav kushot. And that secret of creation, you're not allowed to have challenges or difficulties in those secrets of creation because we're not capable of understanding them currently. Lavin haklal hakol miyad, to understand them right now. But when a person falls into these questions that are philosophical in nature, these questions which have no answers right now currently, when he falls into these kushiot, shenogim besoda bria, which are really related to the secret of creation, and that's the reason why we don't understand it, because it's a secret right now, until the Mashiach comes and he reveals that secret. And then through our trying to understand this thing, which is currently a secret, we actually lose our mind. We fall to sleep for 70 years, meaning the 70 faces of the Torah that are available to us, they become hidden. And so not only do we not get the secret of creation, but we also lose all levels of consciousness and understanding that we can have right now. The Inyan Shena Zumir, and this is all brought in the 60th Torah of the Kutzimran, that through this falling in physical taiva, he then falls from the 70 faces of the Torah as well. Because every time that a person falls asleep, every time that there is sleep from the life of a person, it illuminates him the revelation of godliness, the Torah. That when a person falls asleep, but while he was awake, he really made the most of his day. And he didn't engage in secular wisdom, and he tried his very hardest to eat within measure and to have physical intimacy with, in a way which is in accordance with the Torah, and all of these different aspects of physicality, he linked it to something which was spiritual and godly. So now when he goes to sleep, his soul, his mind, his consciousness gets renewed, and he gets new revelations of Torah while he's sleeping. That the sleep actually draws down higher levels of understanding. And then that which he learned during the day, he has new understandings of when he wakes up. And the advice and these new chidushim that he learned in this class and in the Torah that he learns, that he heard from the tzaddik, now it enlivens him. Like it says in Mishlei, Be'or Pnei Melech Chaim, in the light of the face of the living king. What is the light of the face of the living king? There's no light except for Torah. And that Torah comes from the tzaddik, the Or, the tzaddik. This is the light of Hashem. So that's what we're learning about right now. However, when you fall from all 70 faces of the Torah, meaning you're sleeping for 70 years, then the light of Torah is concealed from you completely. And remains there a weakening of one's life force. And then he falls into a complete strong sleep. And what there was originally a test, he didn't fall asleep for 70 years. Why? Because he only fell in tavot of this world. Dying, he was still able to wake himself up and to renew himself. He was able to quickly start over again. However, when he blemished his thoughts, his mind, he started to have distorted thoughts which came from secular wisdom, which he only imbibed in, and because he fell in taiva, now his mind, so to speak, is blemished. And through this, he falls from the 70 faces of the Torah. And then he starts to feel like he has no hope. He starts to feel like he has no capacity to be able to overcome these challenges in his life. Like whatever's he's struggling with, he'll never be able to move beyond and to elevate from. He'll never be able to heal, and he'll never be able to have a wealth or health. He'll never be able to have peace at home. He'll never be able to overcome his own inner demons. Why does he feel so hopeless? Because he's sleeping. He's sleeping in the mind and he's sleeping in the heart, and now he's lost all hope. He doesn't feel like through Torah and through Kedusha he's going to be able to heal. From this itself, the person becomes in a state of despair. And this is why Rabbi Nachman was able to scream, Ein shum yesh ba'olam klal, that even though he had tuberculosis and he was dying, and he had tremendous pain and suffering, he screamed to his students, there's no such thing as despair in the world at all. Why was he able to be so sure of this when we will go through any type of difficulty, even if it's just a little inconvenience, I fall into despair completely right away? So the reason is because we're not yet holding at the level of completely staying away from secular wisdom and having really mastered our bodies to the extent that we don't engage in superficiality, we don't engage in excess of the physical world, and we are only using physicality as a means for spirituality. But the whole ikar of the tzaddik is that he's done these things, he's achieved these things. So as a result of this, he sees clearly that there's always hope. And that hope itself is in the Torah itself. It's in a life of Torah. It's in a life of spirituality. He thinks and he believes and he knows that through simply being a Jew and doing what Hashem wants me to do, there is tremendous hope in this always. And here as well, we can understand something very deep historically. We know that only like in the past 200 or 300 years, there started to be new versions of Judaism. Conservative Judaism, Reform Judaism, more recently than that, even new wave types of expression of the Torah. And even in the times of the Gemara, they had different people, there different sects that were popping up of Judaism, different than that. So now, where did those come from? So this is very deep. It actually comes from engaging in physical taiva without constraint. That from my engaging in that, then all of a sudden, I start to yearn for secular wisdom. And we see that what Jews push for us to be in secular schools. Secular Jews, ones who are belonging to those types of congregations, who have those type of thought processes. Now, we might just have been the kids of those kids and have grown up in those families, and therefore we just are already engaged in it. But those people who created those things, what gave them the havamina, and what gave them the thought to even think to themselves that there's some other type of expression of Torah, there is some other type of way of living in which we do not have to be engaged in the learning of Torah. We can be Jewish all the way and go to secular schools and get secular jobs and be completely engaged just like secular people are in all things that they're engaged in. Where does that come from, that yearning to want to be inculcated in secular education? It actually first comes from falling in taiva. Okay? And then it just ends up cascading and devolving into something which comes to the mind, okay? And this is why in Chassidut, in all forms of Chassidut, and in all sects of Chassidut, you see that the one thing which is similar between all of them is this tremendous exhortation not to be involved in secular wisdom at all. None of their kids go to secular schools. They don't even learn secular languages. They learn Yiddish, right? And what's the reason that they do this? It's not to insulate themselves from the world. It's because they understand that these things have tremendous deleterious effects on one's spiritual life. And they're able to lose out on everything and to fall asleep for 70 years. As opposed to the struggles that we're just going to naturally have simply from my having to overcome and fight through the excesses of this world, to fight through the traps of this world, not to have to double down on the difficulty by also losing all hope in spirituality, losing belief in God, losing belief that the Torah is my way out of all of these things, that I'm just living like a non-Jew and that this itself is going to bring all my happiness in my life. And Rabbi Nachman says, and this is where we'll finish. Bezrat Hashem, if you guys have any questions, you can ask. A person might think to themselves, well, what if I was busy my whole life learning these things? Okay, so maybe I don't learn them anymore, but I still feel it affecting me. I still feel like I lost, so to speak, my innocence, right? And now whenever I learn something which goes against things that I understand logically because of what I learned growing up in my secular school, it makes it so hard for me, it makes it so difficult to me. So Rabbi Nachman says, don't worry, because I am a river which cleans from all stains. What does that mean? It means that I'm not a river which is red. I'm a river which is pure water. I'm a wellspring. And when you learn my Torah and you take my advice and you live with it, it's like you're dipping your mind and your heart in a mikveh over and over and over again. And when you do that, no matter what you have done, no matter what you've been through, no matter what you've seen, no matter what you've heard, no matter what you meditated on, no matter what you believed, all of it will be purified. All of it will be nullified. All of it will become pure luminance and reflections of rays of godliness will be coming through you. Through this constant learning and application of Rabbi Nachman's Torah, you are dipping your mind in the purest mikveh. But it takes time, right? It takes time. Now, even halachically, it's just it's an interesting phenomenon. For a mikveh, you need 40 seah of water. It's a measurement. If you don't have 40 seah of water, if you have 39 seah of water, it's not kosher. It doesn't do anything for you. But somehow you put one more seah of water, and now it's this unbelievable thing, this incredible tikkun of the soul, right? It purifies you completely from everything. Okay, but a wellspring is fascinating. A wellspring, you don't need any measurement of water. If you dip in a wellspring, it's like you're in a mikveh, no matter what the measurement is. It's pure no matter what. Even to the extent that even if those waters trail off away from the source of the water, and you simply dip your hands in them, right? Or you're able to dip your body in them. It's a very small, but you put it, it's connected that you did tevila. You did dipping, whether it's through a mikveh, whether it's through vessels. That's the koach of a wellspring. The koach of a wellspring is so deep that simply tasting it, touching it, being a part of it, even if it's only a little bit of it, but it's constant, you purify more and more and more and more. Okay, so we have a question. Let's see what it says. Please excuse my inarticulateness. Found it hard to follow because of fatigue. Would you mind to clarify and link why constriction is higher than white revealed rachamim? How does one sweeten the red constriction? Also, regards to secular wisdom, how does one not become disheartened after having given up on all forms of it, and still the residual effect of having such a great impact on these fallen beliefs and sadness? How does one overcome past secular wisdom other than hibodedut, tikkun klali? How does one rectify koach medameh when I'm realizing it's the source of my current terrible anxiety? What I can't meditate right now? What other ways can I rectify my imagination? I hope this is clear. Very good. Okay. First off, why is it that constriction is higher than expansiveness? Why is it that redness at its source is even higher than whiteness? So I'll try to make it as simple as possible. We just said before that pure knowing is the concept of pure love, pure compassion, pure rachamim. That's like the concept of the mind, right? That's why it says that the mind is white. It's whitened, okay? It's pure clarity. It's like the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. It's das. However, we know that there's a level of the soul which is higher than that, which is called keter. Keter is called the crown. You'll notice that a crown goes above one's head and also is circular. So as to the mind, as opposed to the mind, which thinks in a way which is linear, you have something which is above your mind, which transcends your mind, which is circular. Okay, so try to follow with me. The level of knowing, which is very, very, very high, is the level of pure revelation of godliness. It's like the pure waters of the mikveh. It's like Moshe Rabbeinu, his das. But then we have the Mashiach himself, the soul of Mashiach, King David, who is the crown on that head. Now, King David's life is filled with suffering. It's filled with trials and tribulations. However, through those trials and tribulations and being able to actually utilize those difficulties to connect to Hashem through the challenge itself, and in doing so, he sweetens it by bringing Hashem into that place of concealment, he actually is drawing from the keter, the crown. Why? Because the reason he doesn't understand what's taking place in his life is actually because it's coming from a higher place than the mind. A higher place in the mind means that it transcends the mind. And that's the reason why his mind can't fathom it. That's why we can't fathom the difficulties and the challenges of our life, even though that according to Kabbalah, it's all good. So then why is it that we're suffering so much from it? Because these experiences transcend the limitations of our mind. But in the sense that they transcend our mind, it's like a constriction for us. Why? Because the only way we're able to get through it or understand it, Rabbi Nachman says, is by limiting our understanding. It's by taking what we know and understand in our mind and, so to speak, throwing it away while we go through this thing and believing that it's for the good. We ourselves constrict our mind. And in through doing so, we are able to actually, as time goes on, ultimately understand the depths of love and kindness that's in whatever is going on. But it only comes from first this level of constriction. So, but this keter, this crown, right, this crown, it's only apprehended through that simsum that we apply ourselves, right? That King David applied. That through the difficulties and suffering in his life, he relied completely on Amunah. That he believed that no matter what was going on, it was all for his good, it was all for the best. It was all coming from a place of love from Hashem, okay? He didn't know it, he believed it. How did he believe it? Because he took what he knew and he threw it to the side. Now a person might think to himself, this is a very high level of ignorance. But if a person is honest with themselves and humble enough, then to even think that I could possibly fathom God is a ridiculous notion. That I, a creation of reality, even if, like, let's say for instance, you create something. Imagine you create a wooden block. Would you ever think to yourself that that wooden block should be able to understand you? Would that wooden block ever have the gall to think that I could understand the one who created me? Kol shekain us, that we're created by something much greater than ourselves. Something which has no limits, no bounds. That the highest level of knowing him is knowing that you don't know him, right? So, to even think that we can understand Hashem is ridiculous. Now, does that mean that we can't know him in a way that we need to know him? No. That's what we're here for. We're here to have a relationship with Hashem, to know that all comes from him, and to be able to increase in our levels of knowing that. But to actually know him in his essence, that's impossible. So when a person goes through something in their life, so to think that I should be able to understand how this is good for me, it doesn't really make any sense. Why should I think that I'm going to understand at the depths of Hashem's essence why Hashem's doing this to me? Like Hashem said, you cannot see me and live. You can't perceive this and be in this physical world. It's impossible. So what do you need to do? He said, look at my back. And according to Kabbalah, they said this is all related to the tefillin, which is on the head. Why? Because you have this back of the tefillin. The back of the tefillin is actually a strap. Okay, it looks like a dalet. And it goes on the back of the skull. The same place where the luz bone is. The place where you're going to be resurrected from. And on top of that, according to Kabbalah, it's taught that Mashiach ben David, he comes, so to speak, from this back strap. Okay? So as opposed to the head tefillin, which represent the pure revelation of the oneness of God, but all that can only be experienced through the dalet, through this strap on the back. Now, what is that strap? It's not the letters of the cloth of Torah that are parchment that are in here. It's not pure godliness. It's not pure revelation. A strap represents constriction. That knot is a constriction, but it's a holy constriction. It's dalet. It's taking my mind and putting it on the side and understanding that I don't understand and believing that this is for my best. That's the Dalit. That's the Mashiach. And what we're saying is that in actuality, the source of that Dalit, the source of the ability to do that, to believe above knowing, that's actually higher than knowing. Just like we're saying that having a judgment or a difficulty or a challenge, and I myself apply constriction to it through Emunah, in that place, that's actually a higher revelation of God than just knowing Hashem in this thing, because just like the mind is in the head, but the Keter is on top of the head, so too, knowing is in the head, but faith is above knowing. So it's coming from a higher place. Now, so that's what we're saying. Now, when you take red wine and you drink red wine, meaning you're drinking from the difficulties and the challenges in your life, but you add sweetness to it, you whiten it, you put water in it, you put das in it, you put the Torah of Rabbeinu into it, you put the advice of Rabbi Nachman into it, right? You put the Torah into it. Then all of a sudden, that becomes the greatest revelation of God, much higher than if you just knew Him. And this actually is alluded to as well. It says that when the Avot are resurrected, and all the tzaddikim are celebrating because the Geula takes place. So we have to make Havdalah on the world, right? Because anytime that you go from one state of existence to another, or one state or time of spirituality to another, we always have to make Havdalah. When you go from the week to the Shabbat, you have to make Havdalah. When you go from Shabbat to the week, you have to make Havdalah. When you go to a Yom Tov, you have to make Havdalah. You have to make separations. You have to say, so to speak, I'm separating this new state of existence from this prior one. I'm elevating from this place. And we always do that through wine. Okay? So who's going to make Havdalah on the whole world? Who's going to make Havdalah on this whole state of existence, these 6,000 years of creation? So it says that all of the Avot themselves are going to ask King David to do it. You make Havdalah. And he's going to refuse and say, why should I do it? What did I do? I'm nothing. You should do it. You're the Avot. You achieve the highest, greatest levels of closest to Hashem. We have Geula only because of you. And their response is going to be, but do you know how much suffering that you sweetened? Do you know how much you went through? It says in the Midrash that there are, of all the suffering in the world, the Mashiach takes upon himself to go through 1/3 of it on his own. He took 1/3 of the world's suffering on himself so that the world shouldn't have to. Okay? Why does King David make Havdalah? Because that's a greater revelation. His ability to go through those challenges and difficulty and to rely on Emunah completely above knowledge, that itself is the highest revelation of godliness. And so he needs to be the one to bring us to that next stage. Because Rabbi Nachman says that new song of, that new consciousness that's going to be revealed in the world, the das that's going to be covering the world like water covers the sea, that is all going to be given birth to through Emunah. Any other questions? Don't be shy. Person who's shy doesn't learn. I feel that when I'm telling Hashem, I don't understand how this challenge in my life that you're giving me is good, but I choose to believe that it's good and that you're doing this good to me because you love me. I feel that when I say it, I don't actually believe it. I kind of like I'm faking it. Okay. So, this is what we're learning. That, first of all, the saying of it itself is an expression of belief. Even if you don't feel it, to understand that my feeling is not reality, right? Just because I feel something doesn't mean it's true. Just because I think that somebody is making fun of me doesn't mean that they're really making fun of me. Just because when somebody says something to me and they say, hey, do you mind doing it like that? It doesn't mean they're criticizing me. It could be they just actually want it like that. It's like a very, very straightforward thing. It has nothing to do with you as a person. But we take it so personally. Why? Because feelings are based on one's heart. The fact that I feel something or don't feel something is not a reflection of the reality of that thing. A Jew believes in Hashem no matter what. So when you're saying that I believe in you, right, you are speaking the truth. The fact that you don't feel it, that feeling will come later. When will that feeling come later? Through constant application and learning of Rabbi Nachman's Torah in one's life over the course of time, the power of imagination becomes rectified. And once that happens, then you're going to be able to feel what you know. But that takes time. So in the meantime, we say the truth. And when you keep saying the truth over and over and over again, as time goes on, it's like water on a rock. Eventually the rock will break, right? Even though water is not as strong as a rock. It doesn't feel real to the rock. And you're putting it on, it's like, this is nothing. But by putting the water on the rock every day, without fail, then eventually a hole is bored into that rock. Okay, so we see that in reality, the water is stronger because the water is the truth. Not the truth that I feel, the truth that is deep within me, the truth that I know, that's deeper than my feeling right now. As time goes on and the heart is rectified, you'll be able to feel and experience that which you know or believe. Does that make sense, Barucha? I'm going to take the non-response as a pure level of highest oh, okay. Thank you, Rabbi. Yes, okay, understood. Okay, very good. Any other last questions? Fed used to ask a question after every class. Any final questions? No. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. Please make sure that you walk with this Torah. Think and meditate on what we said. Use your Hippo to do it as a time to reflect on these ideas, that the greatest, the most powerful way to purify one's power of imagination, like Chaya asked, what's the most powerful way to do that? It's that in your Hibodedut, you turn Torah into Tefillah. Because Rabbi Nachman explains that all of his Torah is actually drawn from Nevuah. It's drawn from prophecy. And that prophecy, that Nevuah, is actually what takes out all of the Koach Medameh and gives you pure powers of imagination. So take what we're learning and meditate on it. Think about it. Pray on it. Live with it. Talk about your experiences with your group. And speak to your friends about it. Start over again. Like new. Everybody have an amazing, amazing week.